Welcome to this month's live Q&A where we hook you up with all of the answers that you need to know on your hardest real estate investing questions. Man, no fluff, no jokes, just absolutely in the trenches real estate investing guidance. So as you have questions, you can send them over in the chat. And send them over in the chat, and I'll prioritize the ones for the people that are actually on the call. Other than that, you can go to blakeswanay.com/ask. At any point, you can go to blakeswanay.com/ask and ask these questions. And that way, it puts it in the hopper for me to pick them up on these Q&As. You guys can get all of your questions answered. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a few of these. As you guys have questions, send them on over, and I'll get you taken care of. But I'll go ahead and just start working on some of these questions and get you guys the answers that you guys want. All right. So, all right. First question over here. When I'm working with a wholesaler, what contract clauses should I include, and what should I look for in the contract? You know, when you're looking at a wholesaler contract, first, it's important to understand what is a wholesaler and what does a wholesaler do. For those that aren't familiar with it, a wholesaler, they go and get a property under contract. They find a motivated seller. They go get a property under contract to buy it, and then they sell that contract. Now, agents typically don't like wholesalers. It's kind of like the relationship between, doctors and chiropractors, right? It seems like they're a little bit at odds. But wholesalers and agents, there's a little bit of this conflict because agents have to go through a licensing process, and they have a governing body, right, that actually licenses them and regulates them. Wholesalers are not licensed or regulated, and it's because they're doing something different. And a real estate agent is representing a buyer or seller. A wholesaler is not representing the seller or the buyer. They're getting the property under contract to purchase, and then they're selling that contract. So if they find a seller that'll sell a property at $50,000, and they come to you or me and say, I get this awesome property for $70,000, they make 20 grand. And that's a good situation. Usually what these are optimized for, what wholesalers are optimized for, are off-market distressed properties, people that they don't value getting the top dollar on their property. What they value is speed of execution. They want it done quickly. Think about a property where, let's say they're going to be foreclosed on, and I think about one of my first few properties, I think second or third property. The property was going to be foreclosed on the day after we were scheduled to close. So we could not push closing because otherwise they were going to be foreclosed on, and they weren't going to get any money out of that property, none of their equity. So they'd rather sell it at 70% of market value and get some of it out than none. Those are the type of people that would work with a wholesaler, or somebody that maybe their property is not in great shape, but it's worth something, and they don't want to have to fix it all up and get everything pretty for it, do pictures and everything like that, and go through that whole process. They just don't want to deal with it. So instead, they say, "Oh, fine, I'll work with a wholesaler, and the wholesaler will go find me a buyer." So that's what they do. They're selling the contract, which is an important distinction. So then the question becomes, when they come to you and that $70K makes a lot of sense and it's a good deal for you, what clauses should you include in a wholesaler contract? That's a good question, because you have to protect yourself. These wholesaler contracts, because they're not regulated, there's not some standard contract that they use. It's different for every single wholesaler that you use. So there are a few things that you want to make sure that you find and that you require in your wholesaler contract. So when you get the wholesaler contract, you want to review them for these things. So one would be you get your money back if they can't deliver. So if they can't deliver a clear title, you should be able to get your money back. And that's pretty standard. That should be in every single contract. If you need the help of ChatGPT to do this, just go through and say, hey, these are the things I'm looking for. Will you review this and make sure it's in there? To get your money back, that is standard. You're not going to have to argue for that. If you do have to argue for that, this wholesaler is not worth their salt. It's pretty standard. It's one of the first things that should be included in the contract, that if they can't deliver the property to you, they don't get to keep the earnest money, right? It comes back to you. So that's one. So the other thing that I'd say is make sure that you have a clause in there that requires the property to be delivered in the state that you expect it to be in. So if you expect the property to be delivered vacant, you want it to be delivered vacant, not with somebody in the property. If that's not stated explicitly in the contract, you could run into a situation where the seller's tenants stay in there, or they don't move out, and you're the one that has to deal with that instead of the seller dealing with it. You want to make sure that the seller deals with that. And if they don't deliver it that way, you get to renegotiate the contract, push closing, or reduce the price or back out and get your money back. So you want to make sure that it's delivered vacant if your expectation is that it's delivered vacant. Another is, let's see, you want to make sure that the property is delivered to you in a similar condition as when you got under contract. So notwithstanding wear and tear. So just natural, normal wear and tear. So if you got pictures and videos of the property and it's a distressed property, but it's going to take $10,000 worth of rehab, and then you go do your final walkthrough on the day before closing or the day of closing, the morning of closing, and it's caught on fire, right? And it's basically burnt down. You shouldn't be legally held to the contract to buy that property because it's not in the property's condition that it was when you got under contract on it. But if you don't have that in there, it's not going to be, you're screwed. Or if you don't have that clause in there, you open yourself up to a lot of liability. So you can't get, you have to get your money back if they can't deliver clear title. It needs to be delivered vacant, and it should be delivered in a similar condition as to when you went under contract on it. And then the final thing that I like to include in here is that reasonable access to the property should be given between the contract execution date and the close date. What this allows you for is get a contractor in there to update your quote, even have an inspection run, have an inspection done, have an inspector in there. You can go have your boots on the ground, walk the property, or if you're local, you can go walk the property as well. Those 3 access points within a 10, 15, 30-day period, not unreasonable access. So those are the things that I would include in a wholesale contract to make sure that you don't get screwed. That's the whole purpose of reviewing this contract and making sure these clauses are in there, is to make sure that you don't get screwed at the end of the contract when they say, oh, well, sorry, this is just how it is. And you had a reasonable expectation, but because it wasn't outlined, you're up a creek without a paddle, and you're forced into either losing your earnest money, which could be $2,500, $5,000, or with some wholesaling agents, $7,500, or you end up having to buy a lemon of a property where you're going to end up taking a bath and losing a bunch of money on it because you didn't have the right clauses in your contract. So that's what I'd say on the wholesaler clause contract. We had another question that is similar to that about the wholesaling process, which is, it revolves around the difference between MLS and wholesaler properties or purchases. So it's, let's see, how can I protect myself when I'm buying through a wholesaler and don't have an option period? So essentially the backdrop here is you typically get an option period when you're buying off the MLS. All right, you get an option period when you're buying off the MLS. The question becomes, when you're working with a wholesaler, how do you protect yourself when you're working with a wholesaler if you don't get an option period? Because wholesalers typically don't give an option period. So we go back to talking about wholesalers and how they operate. Wholesalers, they don't typically have this property under contract for 6 months. There's not some buyer's rep agreement or seller's rep agreement that they have that property under contract for 6 months. They're usually under contract for 30 days or so. And what that means is by the time it gets to you, they go ahead and sign the contract. They start getting their list together and marketing it to everybody, get the marketing collateral out. By the time it gets to you, they could be 7 days into this thing. So they really only got another about 20 days to be able to close on this. So if they get under contract with you and you've got a 7-day inspection period and you back out, then they've only got 15 days. And it really cuts into their time frame. And they don't want to be backing up. They don't want to be right up against their deadline, because if closing gets pushed because, it turns out Monday was a holiday, or it turns out that, the mobile notary thought it was the wrong day, or just something crazy with scheduling, you're the one out of luck. So for situations like this, what I recommend is, you're less likely to get an option period on a wholesale contract, but it's possible. So try and negotiate your wholesale contract. Try and negotiate an option period into your agreement with the wholesaler. This is probably a coin flip, but if you don't ask, you're never going to get it. So there's a 5-step process I recommend for negotiating an option period into a wholesale contract. And the first part is just assume that you're going to get it. So the way that I recommend doing this is assume you're going to get it and just request it from them. And what you want to do is position yourself as leaning on their expertise. So, for example, let's say they give you a listing and it includes purchase price, rehab, and ARV. Their estimates. Now, wholesalers aren't perfect at estimates. They're never going to be. And they're always going to be better than they actually are, just like a pro forma would be. And the reason for this is they have a vested interest in it. Whether they're trying to do this or not, they have a vested interest. So if I'm selling you umbrellas, I'm going to be telling you it's going to rain. It's going to rain like crazy over the next week, right? It's just the way that you, even if you've got noble intentions, you're going to look at the weather different. So in the same way, their numbers are not going to be accurate all the time. In fact, most of the time they're not going to be accurate. But you want to push back on their expertise and say, hey, this looks great. This deal looks great with the ARV and the rehab purchase price and everything like that you put in there. This is gold. We can close on this in 7 days. I just want to, you go ahead and send the contract over. And just put a 3-day option period in there so I can get my contractor and my inspector in there just to make sure that all these numbers make sense. Boom, we're good to go. Awesome. And you just assume that in there. Sometimes they'll say, awesome, we'll send it over. That's more common for smaller wholesalers, newer wholesalers, smaller wholesalers doing, say, less than 4 deals a year, something like that. So it's less common, but still completely doable. So that's the first thing. They will likely say no. So if they say, well, I can't do that, that's crazy. That's just not how we work. You say, oh, that's fine. Let's just do this then. And you want to gain commitment from that wholesaler to hold the property for you. Right? Get commitment from that wholesaler to hold the property for you and stop marketing it. So you're just going to ask them like, hey, what interest are you seeing on this property? When do you need an answer? How quickly do you need to move? I understand you're not being get do an option period, but you got to protect yourself. I got to protect mine. Can you just hold this for me for 2 days? I'll get an inspector in there. We won't have to sign anything. I'll get an inspector in there and we'll be good to go. I fully anticipate closing on this deal. What you're trying to do is communicate confidence and surety to them in a world where there's not much confidence or surety, because you're not linked to anything. You're not tied to anything. You haven't signed an agreement. So if someone comes and offers more money, they're going to sell it to them. Right. But what you want to do is give them enough confidence where they sit back and they say, all right, I got this thing under contract, or we're good to go. Awesome. This one's going to close. You want to give them that confidence. So that's what you're trying to do. And you just say, hey, can you hold this for me? Now you're relying on their good word, but you're really trying to just help them slow the process. All right. So that's the second thing I do. The third thing I do is I would get a rehab clause in the contract. I would include a rehab clause in the contract. And what this does is it protects you if rehab goes over. So what you do in this situation is you say, hey, that makes sense. I get that you can't just hold the property for me arbitrarily. Let's go ahead and get under contract then. I just need some protection on the rehab clause. That's really the biggest variable. I've looked at ARV. The ARV numbers look decent, reasonably accurate. I would say mine's a little bit more conservative, but that's fine. The rehab numbers, all I need to do is protect that from exploding. So I think your number's fair. I think 10% is, probably just expected. So, but 20% over rehab that's a lot. It should be within 20% of rehab. So if we can just put a clause in the contract that says, if rehab exceeds this dollar amount, 20% over this dollar amount, however you want to word it, if it exceeds this, the buyer has the unrestricted right to terminate the contract and receive their earnest money back. That's all we need. So it's essentially just, if the cost exceeds this for a rental grade rehab, then I get my money back. All right. And now they might push back and say, well, heck, if you want out of this, you could just go get a top end, a contractor to quote you quartz countertops and everything like that. And you say, well, yeah, I guess I could, but I'm not going to do that. So, if we want to put in language in there that keeps it safe for that, that's totally fine. We can add as much information or as little information in there as you want. I'm trying to act in good faith. And all I want to do is protect myself from going in. Like you say, this is $20,000 over rehab. I'm protecting myself from getting in there and being like, this is 80. What are you talking about? Right. And then I have to end up paying for that. So that's all we got to do. So how would you recommend we include that in there? Assume that's going to be included and then put it back on them and say, how would you recommend doing it? So that they're coming up with solutions as well. So that's the third step. And then the fourth step is of the 5 steps for getting an option period with a wholesaler is slow walking the process. So what I mean by this is you don't have any formal agreement. they've said basically, no, you can't get on option period. And what you're trying to do now is slow walk the contract signing process in order to artificially create yourself a wholesale option period. So what this looks like practically is, one, you want to pick the channel of communication that aligns with the speed in which you want to communicate. All right. So on the first front, if you want to move really fast, what's the fastest way to get in touch with somebody? You show up at their doorstep, all right, or you talk to them face to face, or you call them on the phone. If you want the slowest means of communication, you send them a letter or a smoke signal or a carrier pigeon. All right. Like there are different methods of communication that elicit different timeframes of response. So what I recommend here is communicate via email, because the expectation on email is about a 24 to 48 hour response time, turnaround time. So you say, all right, well, let's go ahead and get under contract. You go ahead and send the contract over, and I'll review it and sign it and let you know if we need any red lines. They'll probably send it over to you in the next few hours because they're trying to move really quickly. And then you probably want to, if that's in the evening, let's say that's you talk to them at 4 p.m. and they send it over to you at 7 p.m., respond to them the next morning. All right. You might even respond to them via email and say, got it, I'll check this out, and I'll get you something no later than tomorrow morning. All right. So then tomorrow morning, you send them something back over that says, hey, actually, we need to update this clause, or this language isn't clear, or you ask for something to be updated. So you give them a red line, meaning you need to update a clause. So maybe it's one of the clauses we talked about earlier where you say, well, actually, we need to add in there that this needs to be delivered vacant. That's an expectation. It's just not outlined. We got to make sure that's clear. Or it looks like the assignment of contract isn't actually clear in there, that the purchase price is what I'm purchasing it for, and it's not the assignment of contract fee on top of it, the assignment fee on top of it, and we just need to clarify that. You can probably do that twice, and that will buy you essentially a full 24 hours to be able to get your inspector in. While you're slow walking with them, you want to then get your inspector in there as fast as possible. Get them in there, if you can call them that night and say, hey, can you get me in there? Can you get in there and do something later this evening or early tomorrow morning? Get that inspection done. Get the inspection back from them that day and confirm, hey, can I get this back? Can I put a rush order on this, pay an extra $50 or whatever it costs to get this done quickly? Then you get the inspection done and you update your contractor's quote based on the work that's needed out of that inspection. And you've essentially artificially created yourself an option period where they are sending the contract over to you and you're signing with them, but you've slowed it down enough to where you can get that option period, and it takes 24 to 48 hours to sign it. So that's step 4. And then the final step is you just risk losing your EMD. All right, so you go ahead and sign the contract, and knowing that your worst case scenario is you're going to back out. You're going to back out of this contract if the numbers turn out to be bad. You get your inspection in there, you get our inspector in there, you have your contractor update their estimate. And if the numbers turn out bad, you say, hey, I got to back out of this. You want to avoid this situation at all costs if you can, but it's a pretty fair and reasonable worst case scenario. One of the reasons you want to avoid it is you want to be known as somebody that closes on deals that they get under contract on. Like you want it to be a very rare occurrence that you don't close on deals. But if you're going to back out of the contract, it's a pretty reasonable worst case scenario. Now, the actual worst case scenario, and this is a risk that you got to prepare for if you do back out in step 5, is the wholesaler would have the right to pursue what's called specific performance. So legal action claiming that you did not uphold your specific performance requirements, the performance that you were specifically required to do in the contract. And then they would sue you for that amount. Now, they could sue you to go through with the purchase. They could sue you for, usually it's suing you to go through with the purchase, or maybe some fees that they incurred. The challenge with this is, one, usually buying BRRRR type of properties, the property values are low enough to where it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to do this, because it's going to cost a lot of money and not very much, and a lot of time. And it's not going to have enough of a dollar value return for them to make sense out of it. So that's one. 2 is they're only under contract for a very short amount of time. And so once they fall out of contract, it makes it much, much harder for them to pursue any legal remedy. Because 3, they can't sell the property. They can't even list the property again without having some issues. If they list the property again, they lose the opportunity to actually pursue specific performance. Your earnest money goes back to you because they've already listed it again. So if they list it again, even if the seller lists it again, you're fine. Like you're in good shape. So, but you do expose yourself to a little bit of liability on that side. So make sure to review the contract before you go through and you commit to step 5. Make sure to review the contract that you're signing beforehand. The larger entities like New Western wholesaler organizations, they have a very, very, tightened up, locked up contract where you even have like their non-disclosure agreement fee is like $25,000, right? So I would really make sure that the contract is reviewed before you actually walk into this. So those are the 5 steps for getting an option period. You don't have to have an option period, but it is nice to have an option period whenever you're working with a wholesaler. So awesome. Boom. It looks like, okay. Ken has a question here. Copy link, audience here. Let me reply to him, give him the link. Boom. All right. So we got that one going. Looks like he's good to go. I'll go ahead and post this link in over here. Boom. Awesome. Cool. Sweet. Awesome. So feel free to send your questions over as you guys have them, and we'll get your questions in the chat answered as well. All right. Okay. Next question. What do you do when the deal numbers are so far from working that it doesn't make any sense? Okay. So in this situation, what you're really saying is, what do I do with a deal that doesn't make any sense at all? Do I just throw it away? Do I offer on it? And do I risk offering on it at a number that's so low that it's going to be seen as disrespectful? What do I do there? What I recommend is offer on every property that's sent over your way. All right, that should be your default. The only reason you don't offer on a property that's sent your way is because the numbers are so far off and you want to protect your decision-making capacity so that you can focus on the ones that really will work. But let's say you're in a situation where you don't have many deals coming through because you haven't built out the skill of filling your deal inbox. You haven't built out the requirements, the skill for getting deals into your inbox. So everything that comes through, you feel like, I really want to act on this, because you can only control your attitude and your effort. And the effort right now, if you don't have deals in your inbox, you want to respond with the right amount of action on the deals that actually are in your inbox. So here's what I do. Let's say the wholesaler has listed it at $80,000, and you would need it closer to, you ran the numbers just high level, it looks like you would need it at 42 for it to make sense. Now, if you go and offer that to a wholesaler, they're going to be like, you're crazy, man. That's wild. It's just, no, they might end up being offended. So you might say, well, maybe I just won't offer at all. But the reality is sometimes wholesalers is wrong. There's a wide breadth of wholesalers out there. Some of them are trying to close 10 deals a month, and some of them are trying to close 1 deal a year and just add an extra $5,000 or $10,000 to support their family. So that comes with a completely different level of experience. So if they think this thing's worth $80,000, I can definitely get $80,000 out of it, they might just be wrong, right? They might just be wrong. So the only way for them to know whether it's worth that price is for you to say, this is what I'll pay for it. Something is a good or service is only worth what someone will pay for it. If you think about professional athletes, are they really worth what they're getting paid? Like Shohei Ohtani is a good example. The Los Angeles Dodgers, this guy pitches as the best pitcher in the country, and he hits as the best hitter in the country. Right, that's not normal. Nobody does that. Rarely does anybody pitch and hit. They either pitch or hit. And he does both of them at an all-star level. That's wild. So the best type of hitter, maybe they command a $300 million contract for 10 years, $30 million a year, right? Maybe 35, but that's about the high end. So you might say, well, how much is Shohei Ohtani worth? He signed a contract with the Los Angeles Dodgers for $700 million over 10 years. All right. That's crazy. Is he really worth that? Well, in one sense, no, nobody's worth that. But in the other sense, yeah, because it's what someone was willing to pay. That's all that it is. So whatever someone's willing to pay is what that property is worth. So if someone is willing to pay more than you, good for them. They might have a different model. They might have a different strategy. Fine. But if no one is willing to pay more, then what you're telling them is this is what it's worth to me. So here's how you do that. Here's how you make a lowball offer. You find out what ballpark the property is worth to you from a price standpoint. So if let's say that's $42,000 and it's listed at 80, you reply to that wholesaler and you said, hey, you thank them for sending the information over. You tell them what it's worth to you, and then you add some conditions on it, some context on it to be able to protect your relationship with them. So here's what this would look like. You say, hey, thanks for sending the deal over. I appreciate it. For this to work for my model, I would need it closer to $40,000, $42,000. That might not make sense for you. So if it doesn't, if I'm wrong, feel free to let me know. But if it doesn't make sense, I appreciate you sending it over. Keep the other deals coming. We'll find a way to make some money together. All right. So the context that you're giving them is for my model, for my strategy, I need it at this number. You're not saying you're an idiot, you've overpriced this. You're saying for my strategy, for my model, this is what I need it at. And I recognize that might be crazy because it's almost half of what it's listed for. So that might be crazy. If it doesn't work, fine. If it does, cool. What you'll find is, one, most of the time they're going to respond. Sometimes they just won't respond because they got a lot of inbound information on that deal or a lot of action on the deal. But sometimes they'll just respond and say, no, that doesn't work. I appreciate it later. All right. So it still maintains the relationship and you can keep moving and you can keep making progress and focus on the deals that actually are worth your time. But then this happens rarely, but every now and again, this happens where 2-3 weeks later, you get an email or a Facebook message or a text, whatever their preferred communication platform is. And they say, hey, going back to this property, would you do 45? All right. So they then come back and they say, hey, would you do this? What you know then, because you're such a low offer, what you know is you are their only option right now. And so you have a lot of negotiation power because they might be asking for 45, but just the fact that they're engaging with you means there are no other options out there. So you can own that and say, I can tell you exactly what it's worth for me. Let me run my numbers. I'll give you a hard number. You go check your numbers and you run them a little bit more specifically. And you say, I could do 40 on this, $40,500. All right. And what that allows you to do is then you say, this number is exactly what works for me. And you want it to really work for you, not just be like, oh, I'm close, because they don't have any other options. And if they say, well, that's below what I have it under contract for, you can say, yeah, I understand that. So, one thing you could do is you can go back to the seller, you could renegotiate price. And I'm telling you right now, I can do $40,500. We can get under contract in the next 2 days. That gives you a little bit of strength going to the seller to say, this is what I have it under contract for, and this is what I buy it for. I've got somebody else would actually buy it, I already know, for this amount. And then they just have to negotiate that price down to whatever makes them some money. And the seller is willing to adjust to. So if they can get the seller to come down to 38, they make $2,000. They can get the seller to come down to 20, they make a lot more money. But they have to go and renegotiate with the seller, and that doesn't always work. They might say, well, I've already done that. Okay, well, this is the number I can do. If that works for you, great. Otherwise, sorry. But that's what I recommend on how to essentially how to make a lowball offer and how to address situations where the price is just so far off. Because right now, today's market, wholesalers are very proud of what they're offering. They're very, and that's really a tactful way of saying they're overpriced all the time. You almost 99% of the time you should be offering below list price in today's market. And this wasn't the case 3, 4, or 5 years ago, but it is the case now because it's a buyer's market now. And the nice part about that, there's a trade-off and there's a good component of that. The good part about that is because it's a buyer's market, what that means is there's less people actually trying to buy, right, from an investor. You have a lot less competition. So there's less people out there and you can get better deals because if they've listed it at one price and it's been sitting there on the market or it's been sitting there not closed by a wholesaler for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, 2 months, you have a lot of negotiation power. So if it's been sitting there, let's say it's an MLS deal and it's been sitting on the market for a month and it hasn't closed, I would start at 10% below list price. All right. If you don't have any other comps and that's just the finger to the wind that you've got to do, I'd start at 10% below list price. If it's been 45 days and they haven't closed and they haven't, since their last price adjustment, it's been 45 days, I'd start at 20%. And then I'd go to 30% after that. If it's been 90 or 120 days, they're just so far off on their pricing that it doesn't make any sense. Because if you think about a property that hasn't been had a price change in 120 or 180 days, what that means is not only did they not get their list price, they didn't get anything close to their list price to make them say, fine, we'll get rid of it. Right? If someone had come in and offered 10% below list and what they're asking for it, they probably would have taken it. All right. So if it's listed at that amount and someone's coming in at 10% below, they're probably going to take it. But usually people aren't going to come in and offer 20% below or 30% below because, one, they don't know how to. They don't know how to do it without being disrespectful or making the other person feel a certain way about it. So if you learn how to do it, one, you can learn how to do that, or you can just suck it up and actually just go offer on it. And if they don't like it or they're mad at you, that's okay. You can deal with that because you know who you are. You're confident in who you are, and how they feel about you doesn't matter. So that's one of the nice parts about today's market is, yeah, it's a buyer's market, which means you're the buyer. You want to go buy everything up because this is the time where people say, man, I'm waiting to buy the dip. You know, I'm waiting until the market goes down. This is the market down, or this is the buyer's market that you want to start buying in. Now, you could make an argument that, oh, maybe it'll go down another 1% or another 0.5% or whatever. Yeah, you could make that argument. You could always make that argument with everything. But the reality is you're never going to know. And not only that, if you had the courage to actually buy the dip, you would have done it before. You would have done it a long time ago. And then on top of that, you got to say, well, if it goes down even, let's say that the market's going down and I want to buy the dip. You've got to have the skills to be able to recognize that. You got to have the courage to actually pull the trigger. And if you just keep waiting, you might have to wait 5 years for it to decline 5%. But over that 5 years, it went up 15%. So actually, you're paying 10% more than you would have just bought if you just bought right now. So that's one of the sweet spots of today's market, and what we're actually experiencing right now is a buyer's market. So make it happen. Go buy some properties, and then in 5 years, 10 years down the road, you'll look like the genius. So yeah, that's my recommendation. All right. Next question. All righty. How do I scale my portfolio after my first deal? Okay, so it looks like they've got their first deal, but they're not sure how to go from there. You can answer this one of a few ways, and it depends on your strategy and what you're actually trying to do. Because if you are, let's say you're buying turnkey properties and you got to show up with 20% down on every single deal, that's going to be pretty hard to scale. Unless you're starting with $200,000, $500,000, maybe $1 million. Yeah, you can scale that way. But if you don't have as much money and you need something more scalable, you got to get something like the Burr model involved. You need something, or maybe you lean into some creative finance or whatnot. But I think the Burr model makes makes sense for the right next step, and then scaling into and expanding after developing some proficiency and expertise there, scaling into something a little bit more complex like subject to or creative finance, wraps, and things of that nature. So what I recommend for what to do after you close your first deal is, first, what should your first deal be? And then second, how do you scale after that? So when I talk to students, in fact, I talked to somebody earlier today who's a brand new investor looking to get started, and they said, should I start with multifamily apartment complexes or should I start with something else? I said, well, let's think through that. When you're thinking about where should I start with my investing journey, you have to think about risk. That's what, investing in everything includes risk. There is risk in everything. There is nothing without risk. Being alive just fundamentally includes risk. I mean, if you've ever been in a relationship, that includes risk. If you ever try to be a parent, that includes risk. We've got a newborn here at home. So, what is he? He's 2 weeks old, I think. I don't know. We're still in the fog of war right now. But, all of that includes risk, because you think specifically about parenting, man, we've lost 2 babies in the last 18 months. So when you're trying to have a baby, That includes risk. Don't tell me that doesn't include risk. That's just, everything includes risk. So then the question just becomes, what is risk? How do you define risk? Risk is a function of two things, and only two things. What's the cost and what's the chance? What's the pain? What's the probability? So what's the pain, the cost? Like, how much does it cost if this goes wrong? And this is easier in the investing space, in the money space, because we can actually put a number to it, right? In the relationship space, it's a little bit harder. But we can actually put a number to this. So what's the cost of this going wrong? And then what's the probability? What's the chance that this actually happens? So an example of this would be flying in an airplane. Let's say, if you fly in an airplane and it goes down, what's the cost? Well, you die. Right? You're not going to survive that. Commercial jetliner, you're just not going to survive that. The probability then is, it answers the question, why do people do that then? Like, why would you even do that? Well, because the chance is 1 in 11 million. All right, a commercial jetliner hasn't gone down in the United States since September 11th. All right, that's 2001. That's a long time ago. So 1 in 11 million, that's something like 500 times safer than, from a mortality standpoint, than driving an automobile. It's actually safer. So that's why they do it. Because yes, the cost is high, but the likelihood of it happening is almost zero. So we also need to look at our investments through that lens. What's the cost of it going wrong, and what's the probability? So you think about your first deal, you're really evaluating what's the risk profile of my first deal. Because getting a single family or a 200 unit apartment complex, it's just a skill to develop. It's not magic. It's not art. It's science. It's a skill to develop. The challenge becomes what the risk profile is in building that skill and doing it. So if you try and build a skill and do it right away and close a 200 unit apartment complex, let's call it a $20 million apartment complex, and you screw it up, that's a different price tag than screwing up a $100,000 property. Let's just assume you screw your first property up. We're trying to put a pain to it. You screw it up 10%. On a $100,000 property, that's 10 grand. Now, no one wants to give away or donate 10 grand, right, to the School of Hard Knocks, but it's way more tenable than the other option, which is screwing up a $20 million property, 10%. That's $2 million. Right? For most people, that's bankruptcy. Right? So you want to avoid situations like that and put yourself in a situation where you can start with a reasonable risk profile and then develop the skills that you need to then be able to build on. You're building blocks. Right? So let's say that there's 10 skills that you need to learn to be able to close that $20 million property. A single family home, maybe you learn one of them. And then you go, the difference between a single family and a duplex is basically nothing. Then your next one is a duplex, right? And then after that, the duplex to quadplex, basically nothing. There's no difference. So then you build a quadplex, or then you buy a quadplex. 4 to 8, I mean, they're very similar if you go in that small of an increment. But you are learning some discrete skills along the way. The difference between 1 unit and 30 or 40 units closing all at once is a really pretty big jump. But if you go 1 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 8, 8 to 12, right? Those steps are a lot more consumable. So whenever you start out, I recommend starting with something that is single family or small multifamily up to a quadplex. And the purpose of that is just risk mitigation. It's just protecting your risk profile. Then scaling after that, you can either optimize for closing properties that you've done before, that and really sink your teeth into just closing single family or just single family and small multifamily. Great. Or you can take the next step and you can increase the unit count that you're closing on. That's one component to it. The other component is when you're scaling your portfolio, especially with BRRRR, your ability to close properties and how quickly you can move is really defined by 3 things. How much money do you have? How much private money do you have access to? How quickly are you turning them around, right? And how long is your average rehab, right? How much is your average all-in cost? Because you've got the amount of time for your rehab is how long can you actually turn it around. You've got your average rehab or your average total all-in costs, and then the money you have accessible. So let's say you got a private money lender that's got $100,000 that they'll lend you. And your average rehab, turnaround time from close to close, so purchase, fixing it up, and close to refinance is 3 months. And you only have one private lender. All right. Your average deal size is $100,000. What that means is you've got one deal that you can do every 3 months. Now, if you increase the amount of money you have access to, or you decrease your turn time, that changes everything. So if you double your private money lending accessibility, now you don't do 4 deals a year, you do 8 deals a year. Or if you decrease the amount of time that it takes for you to turn that money around, let's say you can do that in 2 months now. That's 6 deals per $100,000. Now you can do 12 deals in a year. The decreasing of your turn time on average is going to be hard. There's a lower bound. There's just it's kind of like minimizing your expenses. You can minimize it to a certain extent, but not completely go away. So the easier way is to increase your private money. It's to increase your access to private money. So that's what I'd say on the how to scale your portfolio after your first deal is focus on the next step, the next increment of property closing, the property type. And then after that, focus on raising more private money. You as an investor, 2 things that you want to be doing. An investor has 2 things that are highest and best use of their time. That's finding money and making offers. Just those 2 things. You want to outsource everything else as much as possible. Find money, make offers. So yeah, that means find long-term money like hard money lenders and long-term lenders, but those are really pretty ubiquitous. I mean, they're kind of like gas stations. They're all over the place. You spin around in a circle, throw a rock, you'll hit one. You got to find private money. Private money is the cheat code to scaling because one, it moves faster and the terms are way more flexible. Right? You could, for example, you can just pay it all back at one lump sum at the very end and use the equity of the home to do it so that you don't have to come out of pocket at all. The rates are better. The money moves faster. It's just overall, it's a much easier process. So, but that requires you actually finding those people. And that's a skill to develop. It's not, again, that's not art either. That's a science. So you got to find money and you got to make offers. It's not deal analysis. You don't want to analyze 100 deals because if you analyze 100 deals and those deals stink and they're not even worth making offers on, it doesn't matter. You haven't built out the necessary skills to actually find good properties that will support you, all right? That'll actually support your goals. So you got to be making offers. So if you analyze 100 deals, you don't make any offers, that's actually not as good as analyzing 2 deals and making 1 offer. At least you're getting the right deals. Those are the 2 things that you as an investor need to be doing is making offers and finding money. So that's what I'd say on scaling. Boom, 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 boom. All right. How do I invest safely and avoid major mistakes? How do I invest safely and avoid major mistakes? Here's what I'd say to this. 2 words. Due diligence. That's how you do it. Due diligence. And what do I mean by due diligence? What I mean by due diligence is you have to protect your downside, right? Risk is a function of 2 things. The pain, the cost of how much pain it creates if it goes wrong, and the percentage, the probability that it will go wrong. So what you got to do is figure out what's my worst case scenario, put a number to that, and then what's the likelihood that that happens, put a number to that, and just ballpark it. Then the more work that you do on the due diligence side of things, those numbers become clearer. Not only does the probability decrease, but your number on the pain becomes more accurate. So what do I mean by due diligence? Well, the first thing you want to do with due diligence is analyze the deal. You have to know what it's going to output. The difference between gambling and investing is gambling, the strategy is hope. That's a terrible investing strategy. Investing is notably different because investing requires you to have a reasonable expectation of what the outcome is going to be. That's the difference between investing and gambling. So due diligence is how you get that reasonable assurance of what it's going to perform at. You should, before you offer on a property, you should know within $50 a month what it's going to cash flow, and within $1,000 how much it's going to cost you out of pocket in order to do that. Whether it's BRRRR, turnkey, any other model, within $1,000 what it's going to cost you out of pocket, and within $50 a month cash flow. That's what you should do. If you're that sure, then it protects you a lot. And so what that requires you to do is you have to know what the rent's going to be, and it's got to be accurate. So it can't just be something off a rentometer. That's a helpful tool, but it can't just be something off a rentometer. Same with ARV. It can't just be the Z estimate. Everybody knows that that's not accurate. All right? That's about as accurate as my child's sleeping patterns are predictable right now. So you can't use that. You have to find an expert. You got to get a local expert to give you your rent. That's your property manager. And your ARV, that's your agent. Same with contractor. You can't just do price per square foot. That's a helpful tool at the very beginning, but it's going to lead you astray if you use that as your final number. You got to get a quote, a line item quote of the scope of work from a contractor. And if it's your first deal working with this contractor, you probably need 3 contractors to give you a quote so that you know exactly what you're getting into. Those are the things that you can do. Those are the biggest ways that you can protect yourself on the due diligence side of things. You also want to make sure that that your other 2 variables are taken care of. Those other 2 variables are insurance and property taxes. Property taxes, that's public data. You can find that at the county courthouse. Just go search city and state abbreviation. So let's say Dayton, Ohio, property tax assessor, property tax search. And you can search all of that information. Every county has it done a little bit different. If you can't find it or you're having trouble finding it, post in the community, post in the school community, and say, hey, does anybody know where this thing is? And we'll help you find it. There's a lot of people, once you find it for your market, you just bookmark it. Then after that, you got to make sure that you know exactly what your insurance is. And so if you need help with this, I've actually built a partnership with OBI Insurance that allows you to go from no idea what the insurance is going to be to having a binding contract, a binding insurance for that property in 90 seconds. And what they're really optimized for is, 1, the digital ease of use, the digital experience, and 2, they're focused on investors. So they're not trying to sell you life insurance too. They're not trying to bundle your kid's 4-wheeler into this. They are focused on investors, real estate investors. And so they're optimized for that, and they are really, really good at it. So if you want to get a quote from them on a property, go to BlakeChoisnet.com/insurance. Go to BlakeChoisnet.com/insurance, and that'll take care of. I'll also post that in the community to make sure that you guys have that. But the nice part about that, and even when I was building out this partnership with OBI, I told them, hey, look, if you're not the best option, I can't advocate for you. Like, I can't say only use OBI forever, right? They don't expect that. The thing that I appreciate about them is they say, good. They should only use us if we're the best. And most of the time we are the best. And if we're not, we want to get a chance to beat them. Just give us a chance to beat them. And so that's one thing I like about them. But even what I like about this is, with your due diligence, if you got a quote from OBI that says your premium is $600 for 6 months, it's $600 for 6 months, which means $100 a month. And you can put that number into your calculator. So is that number going to go up or down? It's only going to go down, because you can get under contract. That's binding. That quote is active for 30 days. So at any point you can just say, yes, let's bind it. $100 a month is your worst case scenario. Then if you go compare other insurance agencies, when you get to the point where this property actually, you might close on it, you go compare other insurance agencies and you find one that's better, and you find one for $60 a month. Sweet. Awesome. Your numbers just got better. You make $40 a month more on cash flow. That's fantastic. That's a good situation to be. So those are the main things that I would recommend on due diligence. Due diligence, you have to do this in order to protect your downside. If you don't do this, you're gambling. You're not investing. You're using hope as a strategy, and hope is a terrible investment strategy. To truly be investing, you have to have a reasonable confidence and a reasonable assurance of what the outcome is going to be. So that's how I would safely avoid major mistakes in your investing process. The other thing I'd say on that, as far as due diligence is concerned, is you got to get an inspection on every property. You got to get an inspection, or whether you have an option period or not, you got to get an inspection on every property, because the inspector's responsibility is to tell you what's wrong with the property, not to tell you what you should or shouldn't do, just to tell you what's wrong with it. All right. So that's what I would say there. Boom. Perfect. All right. Boom, 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 boom. All right. How do I use other people's money? How do I use other people's money? This is a good question. You'll see OPM, other people's money, abbreviated all over the place. So when you see OPM, just know that means other people's money. All right. So other people's money, it just means it's not your money. So it could be that it's a bank's money. It could be that it's a hard money lender's money. It could be that it's a private money lender's money. And the biggest value add for you and anybody else in investing is private money lending. So it's getting other people to lend you their money so that you can make them a ton of money at the same time you make you a bunch of money. All right, that is the sweet spot. So I'm actually gonna I want to talk through. In fact, I'm bringing up a resource real quick here that I will share with each of you. This is a boom, boom, boom. Yeah, this is a paid resource. But if you message me and say, "Hey, I was listening to the Q&A, and you said you had some private money lender scripts that you can hook me up with," and if you message me and you want these private money lender scripts, I will send them to you. Because the process for raising private money, again, it's not an art, it's science. And so if you're looking to raise private money, this is what I would recommend that you do. Here, and it's a simple 2-step process. The first step is you got to contact people. You got to get in touch with people. And the second step is you got to get them on a call. So the first step is just a feeler to see if you can identify people that would be the right type of people, right? If you find the right type of people for private money lending, when you tell them what you can do, it's like giving them a cool glass of water in the desert. All right. They're going to love it. If you find the wrong person, they're going to be like, "Oh, what are you talking about?" All right. It's like if you go to the ballet, all right, and you try and order a taco, like what you're at the wrong place. You're talking to the wrong person. But if you find the right person, right, you find the right person that cares about the right stuff that you care about, that you can actually provide them, is perfect. It's great. So you got to find the right people. Now, first we got to talk about who is the right person. They have 3 qualities for a private money lender. If you're trying to find a private money lender, you got to know what you're looking for. Then you got to find those right people. Then you got to communicate that value and deliver on it. So who's the right person? 1, they don't like the volatility of the market. They don't like the fact that a political leader or some group on Reddit can completely control, or a tweet by some person in the entertainment industry, whether it's Elon or Trump or whatever it is, they can control it. Right? You saw not MoviePass, but GameStop. GameStop went all up and down and around. And you saw when the tariffs happened, like the market is just really volatile. They don't like that volatility. So that's 1. 2, they want a better return than their current positions are giving them. If it's their 401k or stock positions, whatnot, they're making 2% or 1.5% or heck negative. Maybe it's sitting in a savings account and they're only making 0.25%, which is the average return of a savings account in the United States. They want more than that. Right. And then finally, they want it to be safe. They want it to be risk protected. Like I talked about, risk is everywhere, but there are different risk profiles for investing. There's CDs, or say your checking account, versus venture capital. Venture capital is much more dangerous. It's much more risk oriented. 98% of those investments fail, but the ones that do hit it, they hit it big. Savings accounts, rarely do people fail, but they're not making any money on their money. All right. So it's deteriorating with the lost value of money. So you got to find the right people. You got to find the right people they care about. They don't like the volatility of the stock market. They want to make more money, and they want it to be protected. Luckily for you, you can give them a really predictable return. It will be much higher than anything else that they're invested in right now, and it's asset secured. All right, you have something that is asset secured. It's actually predictable. It's safe for them. So what I recommend here, first of all, that's the first person that you're looking for. And unless I get a comment, this will be our last conversation, or our last question that we go through on this month's Q&A. But that's the first step, is you've got to figure out who is the person that I'm looking for. Then you go look for those people. How do you look for those people? Well, there's a ton of ways that you can look for those people. One way that I think makes a lot of sense is reach out to people that you think either might have money or might have really good connections, might have good relationships. So they might be poor as all get out, but they might know some people. All right. Maybe their whole family is really wealthy and they chose something to go into work for their passion, and they're not making any money, but they know some people. They're well connected. Those are the people you want to talk to. So you got to get in touch with them. Now, the way that I recommend getting in touch with them is a quick conversation. It's usually less than 30 seconds. And what you're saying to them is you're just pitching them, saying, these are the 3 things that this person cares about. And do you know anybody? That's what you're going to do. So you're going to say, here's my value statement. Here's what I do. And here's how it works really, really well with people. Does that, anybody? All right. What this does is, 1, it clearly communicates, and this needs to be concise, not paragraphs. It needs to be a couple sentences. And I'll give you an example here in just a moment. You got to hit those 3 things head on. and then say, do you know anybody? Because when you hit those three things head on, it tells them exactly what you're looking for. And then when you ask them, do you know anybody that this would be beneficial for, or that I should talk to? One, it gives them an easy out, right? Like you're not asking them, hey, can I sell you my widget for a low price of $9.95 a month, right? It doesn't make them feel awkward like you're pressuring them, but allows them to opt in, right? So it gives them a graceful opportunity to exit and just say, no, I don't, right? And they're not rejecting you. They're just saying, I don't know anybody. So that's one. The other is they can opt in. I've had this happen multiple times where they say, yeah, I can think of a couple of people, but me, that sounds really interesting to me. We've got $400,000 or $500,000 sitting around. I'm not quite sure what to do with it. It's sitting in index funds, and that's fine right now, but I'd like to make more, right? Then on top of that, it connects you to their network, and we're more connected now than we ever have been. So that's the magic word. That's the magic phrase in asking for private money is, do you know anybody? But it's predicated on the fact that you've got to clearly communicate your value proposition. All right. So what you might say is, if you've got experience, you can say like, I'm investing in real estate. I'm looking for partners to fund deals. And then you can add some credibility if you've got any. You say, I built a portfolio of seven doors over the last 12 months, and my lending partners typically make double-digit returns. So the person that this is best for, they don't like the volatility of the market. They don't want to have to deal with that. 2, they want to make more than they're making now in their investments. And 3, they want something that's protected. They want something safe, right? And they're going to get their money back really pretty quickly. So do you know anybody that would be a good opportunity for? Do you know anybody that would be good for, that I should talk with? And then just pause. Let the silence do the heavy lifting and let them respond. You do not need to respond for them. Don't step into the awkward silence. Let it sit there. All right. So you're really going to say, you're going to get one of 3 responses. Either they'll self opt in and say, great, awesome. That sounds actually pretty good for me. Then you're going to say, all right, let's set up some time for us to talk. Let's set maybe 30 or 45 minutes. When are you available in the next couple of weeks for us to talk? Then they could also say, yeah, I know somebody. Awesome. What you want to ask is, will you connect me to them? Ideally via text or email. All right. Text is perfect, because what you want to do is you want to tie your credibility to their credibility. And if someone's willing to connect you with somebody, they presumably have a strong enough relationship with that person that they can do something like this, which means that person probably trusts them, and you're gonna get that extension of their trust. All right. So you want to say, awesome, would you connect me with them? Can you just hook us up together, put us on the same text thread or something like that? That way I've got their information. And then it's not you reaching out cold. You have a warm introduction. All right. And then the last one would be, they say neither. All right. So they don't say that they know somebody. They don't say that they'll opt in. They'll just say like, no one comes to mind right now, or right. Then what you want to ask is, you want to say, no worries. If someone comes to mind, would you let me know? Right? And get commitment from them. All right. So ask them, if you know anybody, will you let me know? Like, if you think of anybody, will you let me know when they come up? Yeah, sure. Awesome. And then do this at the end of this conversation. I recommend this for any networking type of conversation. Always finish it with saying, sweet, anything I can do to help you? Like, what are you working on? Anything I can do to help you? And allow them to actually come up with something like, and do your best to actually help them. I had a conversation with someone just this morning. We work in completely different spaces. He's in logistics, runs a logistics business. And, I said, what can I do to help you? And I know we work in completely different spaces, but what can I do to help you? And he gave me 2 very specific things that I can actually help with. And so I'm going to help connect him to a couple of people and get him plugged in with some resources that are really valuable for him. So that's the process. That's the first part is the 30 seconds. All right. Then your ideal outcome is getting set up to a 30 or 45 minute call. On that 30 or 45 minute call, and again, I've got all of this stuff is in scripts. I can give you these scripts. All you got to do is send me a message and say, hey, you said on the school Q&A, the monthly Q&A in June, that you were up for giving me some private money lending scripts. I will give them to you. Just let me know. Consider it a baby gift. It's a gift out of the overflow of my gratitude for having baby Parker join our family over the last couple of weeks. So you've got the first step down. They said, yeah, let's meet. Now, if you say, what am I going to do on that 30-minute call? Here's exactly what you do. 1, you want to focus on their goals. You have to understand their goals in order to map your goals to it. And that doesn't mean that you're mapping your goals to theirs no matter what. If they come out and they say, my goal is I want to be the the best basketball player in the world. You say, all right, well, it's not what this was about. And it's not, that doesn't align with my goals. Okay, well, cool. If I know of any good basketball coaches or a good place to play, I'll let you know. Right? If it's not aligned with your goals, it's not aligned with your goals. So first you got to identify their goals. Then you have to position the value that you add. So here's how this happens practically. So, you'll do an introduction, rapport building, and then give them a quick overview of your conversation. Say the goal of this conversation is, and this is called a 4-step start. So purpose is the first part, plan is the second part, outcome is the third part, and a check is the fourth part. So purpose is the goal of your conversation. Your plan is your agenda. Your outcome is your ideal outcome. And your check is, does that sound good? Anything to add? All right, so here's how this will go. Awesome. Goal of our conversation is just to see if private money lending makes sense for us to consider. All right. So the way that I thought we'd do that is I want to understand your goals, talk a little bit about your goals for your money, outline how I work, if it makes sense, how I work with lending partners, see if it seems like a good fit for you. And if it does, we can define some next steps and figure out what our next steps are. That way, by the time we're done, outcome, we'll be able to determine and define whether or not private money lending makes sense for you and actually help you accomplish your goals. Does that make sense? Anything that you want to accomplish or talk about that might not cover, and allow them to add in anything that they want to make sure they accomplish. So that's the overview. Then you go in and you say, awesome. You start talking about their goals. What do you want your money to do for you? Just broad strokes, what do you want your money to do for you? And be very specific in asking them and trying to understand what they want their money to do. All right. Get their goals. After you feel like you've got a pretty good understanding, you can't move too quickly through this. Try and get a pretty good understanding and repeat it back to them. Okay, so what I'm hearing is that you care more about generational wealth and tax advantages than you do cash flow. Okay, that makes sense. All right, or maybe you're saying, I just want my money to grow for me while I figure out where I can put it in a longer term, more sizable investment. But I've got $700,000 sitting around. I don't want it to waste away. All right. So it's more about just efficiency. So you understand the goals for their money, repeat it back to them, then figure out what's your current state. All right. Where are you at now? Okay. So if that's where you want to be, where's it at right now? Like, what's your performance right now? What's it return? What's the return? And repeat them back. Okay. So you want to be here, but your current state is this. All right. Are you happy with this performance? No. Okay. So then where do you want it to be? We talked about your kind of high level goals, but how does that map out to numbers? What do you want your return on your investment to be? All right. So goals, current state, future state. And then now you have the gap. You know the difference between the current and future state. You say, all right, well, if that's the future state that you want, I think I can help. All right. So you're asking for permission and confirming that you can move forward, that they're willing to move forward with you. All right. So what this looks like practically is, well, what you're wanting your more money to do and be performing at sounds like something that would be a good fit for how I work with my partners. Can I tell you how that works? And then we can figure out whether or not it's worth having a conversation. All right. So that's the first. You got to get confirmation and agreement to move into that conversation. Then you're just talking about how private money lending works, but you're not talking about how private money lending works mechanically. You're talking about how it benefits them. So think about this, WIIFM, what's in it for me? That's how people evaluate conversations or pitches or they're trying to figure out, how does this benefit me? They're not charities. Even when they're giving their time, they got to figure out what's in it for me. So what you want to communicate to them is, how does this help them? So you're not going to say, well, I'm going to buy a property and then I'm going to increase the value and then I'm going to refinance and then I'm going to rent it out. I'm going to cash flow and here's my metrics and all that. They don't care about that stuff. Like, a private money lender doesn't care how much you're going to rent a property for, because by that time they're out of the whole situation, right? So you just want to explain to them how private money lending works and how it serves them. So, the nice part about private money lending is you get a much higher return with very minimal work and very low risk. I always say, because I do this all the time, it's the easiest money I ever made. It's not the most money, right? Like, the more risk you take, the more reward you have the opportunity to make, but it is easy money. And you're looking for, the last deal, we made, I made the investor 18%, it's really predictable. So here's how it works. If this is a good fit, we're going to figure out, what terms do we agree to? And I can give some guidance on what market rate is and stuff like that. And we'll figure that out. But after I find a deal, or after we agree to that, I'm going to go find a deal. then once I find that deal, I'm going to come to you and I'm going to say, hey, does this look good? I just need a thumbs up, thumbs down. All right. And if you got questions about whether or not that's good, or it's good or bad, or it's hard, or whatever, I'll help give you some direction on that. And you actually, you review that and you say, yeah, I'm going to go. And ideally I would have an answer within 48 hours. So you say yes or no, because the good deals, you have to act quickly. You got to make well-informed decisions quickly. And so I need to know, do I have the financing lined up to be able to close on this thing? Because that's my differentiator. I then tell that wholesaler, whoever's selling that property, I can close on this in 7 days. We're good to go. All right. So I'll take that. Once I get your confirmation, then I'll get under contract on it. I'll get us connected with title. I'll handle all of the contract development. I'll handle all of the lien placement, everything like that, because it's going to go through title. And then we're good to go. You'll then wire the money over. I'll send you some updates during the property or during the process. And then at the end, I just wire you all the money back, right? And if you're loaning $80,000, you're probably going to make $7,000 on that, in 5 months. That's awesome. So that's how easy it is. Not only are you making a lot of money from a real return on investment standpoint, but your money's reliquid really pretty quickly. So you can decide, do I want to put this back into this or into something else? So does that make sense? So explain the whole thing and then ask them, does that make sense? And then that's a closed question, yes or no. They're always going to say yes. Then say, any questions? What questions do you have about the process? All these questions are going to be their objections. So you then have to just answer those things. All right. And whenever they finish up a question, you answer it. You just say, what else? What other questions do you have? Until they say, nothing else. Then you want to ask for permission again to move into the final stage, which is, you in? All right, like, are you in? And these scripts have the objections and how to handle them and all that stuff. But are you in? And at that point, you're just talking terms. So you're talking about interest rate and origination and prepayment penalties and all repayment, all that stuff, security, whatnot. And then you just close up the conversation saying, awesome, that's all I need. I'll send you a follow-up email with the deals we talked about. Now I've just got to go find a deal. And next steps is I'll send you that follow-up email, and then I'll let you know when I find a deal, and we'll be good to roll. And then send them a follow-up email, because you're going to forget what you talked about. You got to make sure to outline the interest rates and stuff like that so that you've got commitment, and they're going to forget too. So send them that follow-up email. But that is how you raise private money. If you get to the end of that and say, no, it's not a good fit, you want to ask why. Why isn't it a good fit? What part of this isn't good? But usually if you get to that conversation, it's not either the strategy either is or isn't a good fit. It's usually about timing. All right. So the more of these conversations you have, the more likely you are to actually find a private money lender. So if you, two things, if you want to learn how to find private money lenders, you get plugged in with the school community, come to these Q&As. We'll hammer through some of that stuff. I've got a course on how to raise private money. I've raised tens of millions of, maybe $100+ million in private money at this point. And it's more science than it is art. So that's one thing to say. If you're somebody that has over $80,000, over $100,000, and you want to start lending, private money lending, the hard part is finding people that'll actually steward your money well. People you can trust. You can trust their character and their competence. I've got almost 400 students that are doing this, that they're vetted and everything like that. If this is something you want to do, go to BlakeSchwaney.com/PML, or on my drop page at the very top, you see Invest with Us. You can click that. Just fill out an interest form. I don't work with everybody that wants to work with me, but if our goals are aligned and our values are aligned, I love helping people make lots of money. So that's somewhere that if you're interested in getting started with private money lending, I'll walk you through the whole process. I'll give you all the calculators, all the resources, how to protect yourself and stuff like that. I'll get you taken care of, and we can get you funding some deals and making some good money, some good double-digit money. Awesome. All right, these are great questions this week or this month. These are great questions. If you got questions for future iterations of this Q&A call, go to BlakeSchwaney.com/ask. That's BlakeSchwaney, CHOISNET.com/ASK. And that will allow you to ask questions for me to go through on these calls. And then we will talk again next month, and I'll get you guys taken care of on all your hardest questions. All right. We'll talk soon. Happy investing.